From the guy who made video about video games brings you video about video games too. Sequels are a standard when it comes to video games. I mean, who needs original ideas when you can just have another Assassin's Creed? It feels like just about every successful game gets a sequel. I mean, it just makes sense. The fans like a game, why not give them more game to enjoy? Some of the most beloved games of all time are sequels. But at the same time, a lot of the most hated games are sequels also. Making a game sequel is much riskier than it sounds. If fans like a game, they'll go into the sequel with higher expectations. You must make a game that can stand toe-to-toe with the original. But what does it take to be a good sequel? What are some pitfalls sequels should try to avoid? What are some of the best and worst sequels? Let's discuss. I think the hardest part of making a sequel is finding the delicate balance between old and new. A sequel should be a continuation of the characters or world. People like the first game for a reason, and it's why they want more. Make sure to add everything that worked in the first game and expand upon it in the sequel. An often hated sequel is Zelda 2. The first game was a top-down adventure game, but for the sequel they made a 2D action platformer. I doubt anybody was hoping for a change of genre so soon, and Zelda 2 is often considered the worst game in the series. Why throw all that work away so soon? It's a good idea to keep a list of things that any game in the series should have. Genres, mechanics, theming, story, characters, etc. If you think fans want a sequel that changes everything from the first game, then why make a sequel? Just make a new game. Like, how did Pac-Man go from this to this? That being said, there is such thing as a sequel too similar. A sequel should add something new, shake things up, and stand on its own. An example of sequels too similar are the new Super Mario Bros. Games. As the new series went on, they got less and less original, to the point most people would have trouble telling the games apart just by looking. They all had the same plot, same enemies, same world, same graphical style, etc. They look so similar, it's one of the many reasons the Wii U failed. People saw New Super Mario Bros. U and thought it was just New Super Mario Bros. Wii, and assumed the Wii U was just a weird controller for the Wii. Finding the balance of similar and altered is the key to a satisfying sequel. I think a great example of the balance is the game We Love Katamari. The original Katamari was about rolling objects into a ball to make the largest ball possible. The ball would grow as big as the system could handle, so they couldn't really make a sequel with bigger levels on the same system. So they very cleverly made new goals outside of just growing in size. There were levels about rolling up food to feed a sumo wrestler, rolling up fireflies to make the brightest light possible, and rolling items while avoiding cows and bears. It's still Katamari, just in a new context. I do think if enough time has passed and certain series tropes have overstayed their welcome, you can be laxer with what's allowed to change. By the time Skyward Sword released, fans grew tired of the standard Zelda formula. The series did basically everything they could do with the dungeon cycle of the Zelda games, so when it came time for the inevitable next Zelda game, they wanted to rethink and remix the Zelda formula. Instead of a game about completing several dungeons in a specific order in a linear path, they made an open-world game where dungeons could be completed in any order. This game became the game The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. Even when Breath of the Wild remixed and reimagined so much about Zelda, it still felt like Zelda. There were still themes of puzzle solving, story, and adventure. But Jack, so when Zelda 2 redoes the series standard, it's a bad sequel, but when Breath of the Wild does, it's good? What? Yes, Zelda 2 was too quick to change the status quo. There was still so much that could be done with the top-down style of games, and other sequels proved that. But Breath of the Wild came in a time where fans grew tired of the formula. To end this section, let me use an analogy. The original game is a milk chocolate bar, and the sequel should be a dark chocolate bar or a white chocolate bar. Something like chocolate cake is too different, right now at least. There's still much more that can be done with the bar format. Also, another milk chocolate bar would be too similar. You didn't make a new chocolate bar, you just gave it a new wrapper. Another thing a game sequel should strive to do is listen to feedback of the first game. The fans that love the first game are the ones we need to satisfy with the sequel. Ask yourself, what did fans like and dislike about the first game? The first game probably had some flaws, and that's okay, no game's perfect. Perhaps some people that played the first game have comments on what they thought could be improved. The original Animal Crossing had it where to get a fossil analyzed, you would have to mail it somewhere and wait till tomorrow to get it back assessed. A lot of people found this tedious, so Nintendo streamlined the process in the sequels. It just makes sense. On your second attempt, why not do better? This seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how often series refuse to improve certain features. I'm looking at you, Mario Kart blooper. You don't even need to necessarily cut out features entirely. There's probably a way to work it around so it's not as bad. There are times a feature is so integral that you can't really edit out or remove it in any way. Like, you can't really remove the real-time clock system from Animal Crossing. So if you're in a situation where nobody likes the main mechanic of your game, you probably shouldn't make a sequel. Listening to feedback doesn't only include negative things, there's plenty of good features you can expand upon as well. Maybe a certain character was a big hit with fans, so you can give them a bigger role in the sequel. Diddy Kong was introduced in Donkey Kong Country, and he became so popular that he was the star of the sequel. An often unconsidered thing when making a sequel is when it should be released. Once again, it's a balancing act of not too soon and not too long. With video games taking longer and longer to release, I don't see sequels releasing too soon as a huge issue moving forward, but it still happens every so often. Modern Pokemon games are being released so frequently that fans are asking them to slow down. These continuous releases every year or two meant corners were getting cut, and many of the recent games are often regarded as some of the worst games in the series. Games coming out before they're ready is becoming way too common. I'm so tired of games releasing incomplete, with hollow promises to finish the game with free updates. I'd rather have a great game later than a bad game now. There's so many games that have left me disappointed, only find major parts of the game were cut out to make a sooner release date. It's okay, companies, we're willing to wait. We have plenty of games in the meantime. That being said, there is such thing as a sequel a little too late. Again, I want to clarify, I understand games take a very long time to make, and many game developers are horribly mistreated to make a deadline. The last thing I want to do is promote crunch culture in the games industry. I'm mad at the mega corporations for deciding when to make the games. A sequel should come out recent enough for people to remember the series, because if you wait too long, general audiences might have forgotten about the original. It took over 20 years for a Battletoads sequel to come out, and I feel like everyone kind of forgot about the Battletoads and the fans moved on. Luckily, there is a way to prevent the series fading into the background. Re-releases! It can be intimidating to play a game with a 2 at the end. If you haven't played the first game, why should you play the sequel first? Well, don't worry. If a sequel is coming up, there's a good chance that the first game, or games, will be re-released or remastered before the sequel's launch. It took Pikmin 4 9 long years to be released after Pikmin 3, and many people who had never played the first 3 games saw Pikmin 4 being announced. So Nintendo smartly remastered the first 2 games months before Pikmin 4 came out, so any new potential fans could get familiar with the series before the latest game released. Their efforts paid off, with Pikmin 4 being the best-selling game in the series. The opposite also happened with Metroid Dread. The last 2D Metroid game to be released before Dread was in 2002. Metroid Dread was meant to be the finale of the Metroid series, so many people wanted to catch up on the series before they could play Dread. But only 2 of the 4 games were on the Switch at the time. You're missing one of the most important parts of the story. Not everyone is a retro game collector, as myself. Most people only have like 1 or 2 systems, so are you expecting fans to either track down a GBA original cartridge or buy it on the Wii U's eShop? The average price of a Fusion cartridge is like $40, and most people don't even know what the Wii U is. Metroid Dread still sold fine, but it would be appreciated a lot more if everyone had the chance to experience the full story back then. If only there was a convenient and cheap way to play games companies refuse to sell themselves. Oh well! While re-releasing previous games is the best way to provide new players time to catch up, it could also be done with things like movies and TV show tie-ins. Here's a lightning round for some less in-depth things sequels should do. Make sure your sequel makes narrative sense. The amount of horrible retcons I've experienced is getting concerning. A sequel should have a title that sounds like a sequel. Mortal Kombat's 12th game being named Mortal Kombat 1 makes it confusing whether people are talking about that one or like the first Mortal Kombat game. If the first game was a single-player offline game and you make a sequel that's always online multiplayer game, don't be surprised when people start throwing bricks through your window. A sequel can have the same art style, but like, dear gosh, New Super Mario Bros. U. Please don't change the controls for no reason, especially if it's on the same console. Before we get to the most important thing a sequel should consider, I would like to review some of the best and worst sequels. Starting with the good sequels, when it comes to improvements, I don't think any sequel is a better glow-up than Earthbound or Mother 2. No offense to Mother 1, but that game always felt way too big for the system it was on, with stiff controls, compressed audio, and aggressively simple graphics. Earthbound used the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom to make a wonderful sequel with sharper controls, an amazing soundtrack, and much better visuals. Super Smash Bros. Melee was such a big improvement on the original that it should basically be the original. So many more characters, stages, music, modes, collectibles, etc. Melee turned Smash Bros. From the silly, unconsequential novelty from the first game to the biggest fighting game series that it is now. Arkham City gave you a whole new city to explore with many more opportunities to be the world's greatest detective. It really made you feel like Batman. Mario Party 2 doesn't hurt your palms like in the first game. Games like Star Fox 64, Rayman 2, and Pilot Wing 64 brought their series into 3D. And games like Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door and Uncharted 2 expanded on their previous games with stories that explored what was capable in the game's universe. When it comes to bad sequels, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is sure to come up. Instead of the beloved 3D platformer collectathons of the first two games, Nuts and Bolts was about building vehicles? The game had some interesting mechanics, but like, why is this a Banjo game? It's hard enough to get a Rare series revived, don't taunt us like this! Other games like Fallout 76 and Metal Gear Survive infamously changed genres from the rest of the series in order to cash in on certain game fads and were widely despised. Bomberman Act Zero made Bomberman look like this. Nintendo Switch Sports launched unfinished and replaced the Miis with these wretched things. Resident Evil 5 and 6 forgot that they were supposed to be survival horror games and just became generic military shooters with zombies in the background. Metroid Other M's story was not well received, to say the least. I might do a whole video on that game. Star Wars Battlefront 2 and Plants vs. Zombies 2 were bad because EA made them, and Sonic 06 was bad because... Now, the last and most important thing to consider when making a video game sequel, ask yourself, does this game need a sequel? There's a somewhat obscure indie game called YumeNikki. It's a very bizarre and artistic game with no real story, characters, or goals. You just walk around dream worlds and see what you can see. People have been spending decades trying to decipher what this game could possibly be about. It's a beautiful, mysterious piece of art in the video game medium. But few people know this game has a sequel. But don't get excited, this wasn't another thought-provoking masterpiece made by the original developer. No, this was a 3D reboot released in 2018 for PC and Switch. The company that produced this, Playism, has been buying the rights for a lot of famous RPG Maker games. Most of their work involves porting RPG Maker games to Steam and consoles. It's just so clear that this was made to make some money from fans, and yeah, that's what all sequels are, but YumeNikki is such a weird IP to make a quick cash grab for. YumeNikki is such an artistic, liminal, and complex game that is unlike anything else. It doesn't really seem like a game that needs a sequel. It's like making Zone of Interest 2 Electric Boogaloo, or Ivan the Terrible and his son Even Tokyo Drift. Just because a game is great doesn't mean you can make it into a marketable series. Amori is my favorite video game and favorite work of fiction of all time. I would hate if it got a sequel. The most frustrating thing a sequel can do is not understand why the game was beloved at all. I know sequels are made to make money, but that doesn't irritate me if they make a sequel worth buying. It's sad when they don't even try. They think, oh, everyone loves Fortnite, so let's remove everything people loved about this IP and make it more like Fortnite. Greed has dug its claws so deep into the gaming market to the point where big companies are making backwards and illogical business decisions for the desperate attempt to have the next Fortnite. And sometimes they bait fans with the promise of sequels, only to give them always online, multiplayer, battle royale pieces of trash. Our favorite series are now just sacrificial lambs to this battle pass gold rush. In a time where basically every big budget game is a reboot, revival, or sequel, it's more and more important we know how to make a good one. Sheesh, that ending was kind of bleak. I'll fix it in the sequel. Look, here's a trailer for it now. What makes a good video game trilogy?